The single most influential person in the development of Icke's current ideas is a man named Brian Desbrow. Desbrow wrote a lot of conspiracy articles and posted them on the internet in the mid-90s into the 2000s. Later, these articles would be compiled into a book. Desbrow is behind an astonishing amount of Icke's research. There's a lot of interesting things about Mr. Desbrow. First of all, despite the fact that his bio says that he served as a director of research and development for several American high-technology companies and has provided consultation to a company involved in deep space research, there's no record of him doing anything like this on the internet, which seems odd since you would think that if a person who was publishing material on the internet so early in its history, that he would also leave some trail to his apparently earth-changing scientific research. Another interesting thing is that despite the fact that Icke, when referring to Desbrow, calls him his American scientist friend, you can read Desbrow's own bio to find out that his information was given to him by spiritual beings like Icke. Desbrow says, during an out-of-body experience which occurred in 1971, he encountered 5 highly spiritually evolved, non-physical beings who informed him that he must write a revisionist history of the world. The purpose of the book was to take the readers out of their comfort zones by presenting them with truth regarding such diverse subjects like the true location of Atlantis, the duplicitous acts of the Illuminati, and the fundamentals of free energy technology. It was not until later that the author learned that the non-physical entities that he had encountered were associated with a non-physical directorate who were the overlords of a group of terrestrial mystics known through the centuries as the Quadragon. It is the role of the Quadragon to intercede in the political affairs of the world periodically in an attempt to elevate the level of human spirituality. It's interesting that, like David, Desbrow also speaks out very harshly against Alice Bailey and the Ascended Masters in his book. He even says, the Lucis Trust is a major New Age command center on behalf of the Illuminati, and her book, Education in the New Age, outlined a social engineering program which later was adopted by the Club of Rome. In it she wrote, the science of eugenics will grow. Desbrow also writes, Ascended Masters were in actuality merely nicknames she had assigned to the wealthy Masonic patrons of the Theosophical Society, and displayed outrage against phony psychics claiming to channel these non-existent beings. But in an equally amazing feat of doublethink, Desbrow believes the exact thing that Alice Bailey believes. That is, that the non-physical directorate, or ascended spiritual beings, are intervening in the political affairs of the world in an attempt to elevate the level of human spirituality, which is arguably the main point to theosophy, as well as all the stuff about the Aryans, which we will see later. As far as Desbrow's scientific background, according to his bio, it seems to be limited to a story he tells where a chance encounter with a pediatrician who had been one of Wilhelm Reich's research associates gave him access to all of his notes, which he says enabled him to acquire a knowledge of weather engineering and organotic science. In addition, as luck would have it, a similar thing happened to him, but this time it was with Nikola Tesla's notes. He says he met an old lady at a spiritual healing circle who had asked him if he liked Nikola Tesla. She apparently then told him a story that he writes on his website. It says, quote, one day, continued the lady, Tesla felt a tug on his coat sleeve. Looking down, he saw the landlord's 12-year-old son, who said, Mr. Tesla, will you teach me all that you know? Tesla was so impressed that the boy became one of Tesla's enthusiastic protégés, and later married the lady the author had just met. The lady then provided the author with some of her late husband's research notes on free energy and anti-gravitic technology. In this manner, many doors were opened, thus enabling the author to acquire meaningful data for his 2 books. The strangest part about Desbrow's bio, in my opinion, is that he claims to be an expert at deprogramming mind control victims. He claims that he does this in order to get information out of them to help his research into the New World Order. He has written quite a lot about trauma-based mind control, and at that time, very little was known on the internet about it. And it does appear he knows quite a lot about how to program multiples. This will become very interesting as we continue this investigation. So with all that in mind, let's take a look at how David Icke was influenced by Brian Desbrow. Icke's book, The Biggest Secret, is the first time that I know of that Icke mentions Desborough in print. He dedicated that particular book to him, and he cites him profusely throughout the book as his source for things like Martians coming to Earth and founding the Aryan race, which the Reptilians used to overtake the planet. Brian is also the source for much of the information on the Babylonian world, and things like black people are a result of the Earth being closer to the Sun at one point, the Ice Age being an illusion, monoatomic gold, directed energy weapons, UFOs are government craft, crop circles are space beams, David's new view on Jesus, and much more. Ivan Fraser, the other person who David dedicated his book, The Biggest Secret, to, later spoke out against David and said this about Brian Desborough, quote, "Is there anything David could tell us about Brian Desborough's background to allay any doubts we may have about his integrity, considering his massive influence in the content and direction of The Biggest Secret?" Also, Icke's subsequent book called Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center Disaster is no better than a copy and pasting of Brian Desborough's article entitled The 9/11 Disaster, the Myth and Reality. If you have read Icke's Alice in Wonderland book on 9/11, please read Desborough's article when you have time, and you will see that the information in there is exactly the same. The wording, even the mistakes. But the curious thing is that even though it's clear from reading Desborough's 9/11 article that Desborough is the one who did all the research, Icke doesn't cite Desborough one time in his book, even though it's painfully obvious that it was taken from him. I think that Desborough was quite content to feed information to Icke, even if he got no credit. One example of this is in regard to the Reptilian scandal. As I mentioned, The Biggest Secret is dedicated to Brian Desborough and another man named Ivan Fraser. According to Fraser, it was Desborough that introduced Icke to Arizona Wilder, and it was her testimony that ended up being the reason why Icke went public with the Reptilians thing. Desborough also admits to introducing Icke to Arizona Wilder, as well as arranging the meeting between the two, because Wilder was a victim of trauma-based mind control, and apparently Desborough had accessed her programming in order to get information about the Illuminati. According to him, he was amazed to find that she confirmed what he had already been telling Icke, which will be important later. This is Ivan Fraser's side of the story. He had been proofreading The Biggest Secret for David Icke, and he found out about the Reptilians thing this way. He says, quote, "Arizona Wilder was not mentioned at all in the draft copy of The Biggest Secret which I had read. David had not met her yet. When the book was released, people started ringing me with questions like, is it true about the reptiles? And is this stuff about the royal family true? At which time I replied that I thought it was, based on the fact that the version that I had read stated only the theory of reptilians and that certain of the royals were involved in satanic rituals. Soon I heard about Arizona Wilder. David stated that he saw his encounter with Arizona Wilder as an amazing synchronicity which endorsed his work in his latest book. How could she have known all this stuff which tallied so exactly with The Biggest Secret? Well, I believe I'm not as naive as David, and I know exactly how she could have known. Icke was passing copies of the book via post to me and others for editing. Fraser continues, this brings in another character who is pivotal to the entire Biggest Secret thesis. It was a contact of David's named Brian Desborough, who introduced Arizona to David. Brian is mentioned as a source for a great deal of the information in the book, having supplied most of the material on which David based his idea about the Martians coming to Earth and founding the Aryan race, which the Reptilians used as a vehicle to overtake the planet. Brian is also the source for much of the information David had compiled on the Babylonian world, its myths, and how they fed into the sinister secret societies. It was Brian Desborough who was also looking at the draft copy of The Biggest Secret at the same time as myself, i.e. before David met Arizona Wilder. Therefore, the fact that Brian Desborough may be responsible for fundamentally leading the direction of David's research, if not planting much of the basis of the book in David's mind, is obvious. But then, to be the same person responsible for giving him the so-called eyewitness to testify to the verity of that information is highly suspicious. Brian also writes articles on mind control and seems very knowledgeable on the subject. Is it possible that he could be directly involved in some way that we are not being told about? Fraser also says that Arizona endorsed Desborough's theories so closely that, quote, you would almost think she had already read the book or had been given the information beforehand. He continues, or considering that she claims to be an ex-mind-controlled slave, could it be that she was pre-programmed? Testimony from Mark Phillips and Kathy O'Brien as to how arduous it is to deprogram a CIA slave makes me very suspicious that Arizona Wilder could be considered reliable. She claims that since her programmer died, the programming broke down. I don't believe this can be accepted as such, and external experts would have to be brought in to convince me that if she was controlled to the highest level, that she could be so deprogrammed now to be considered reliable. Brian Desbrow describes the story in this way. My own research, based on unpublished astrophysical data, revealed that Mars originally occupied our planet's orbit and was populated by a technologically advanced Aryan race. A celestial catastrophe displaced Mars into its present orbit, forcing the Aryan survivors to colonize our planet and subsequently construct the Great Pyramid. Then they were overthrown by an evil priesthood who established the royal court of the dragon in Egypt. While David was writing his book, it was my good fortune to meet the mother goddess of the Illuminati. She corroborated my research, adding that the Illuminati hierarchy are shape-shifting dragons who require the consumption of Aryan blood in order to maintain their shape-shifting capability, hence their opposition to interracial marriages. As we watch these clips of Arizona Wilder, notice that when she was asked about the history of the reptilians, that she says that she was made to learn this. No matter who she thinks taught her this information, the fact that a bunch of Satanists made someone learn something sounds like programming to me.
Your experience being brought up in this Illuminati environment, were you ever told anything about where these reptilians came from and what is the history of it all?
I was made to learn through Mothers of Darkness, which is a certain aspect of the organization, because that was an early part of my training, the history of what was the Illuminati on this planet. And what I learned was that the Aryans originally were from Mars, and the reptilians came to that planet they came from another place, they came to that planet, they came to rule, because they wanted to mix, so they said, with that race, and but they became the overlords.
That's an interesting term, overlords. Brian Desbrow uses it almost 30 times in his book, compared to Icke using it one time, and even that was in a quote. It doesn't prove that the info was planted by Desbrow, but it is a suspicious coincidence.
And the Martians, or Aryans, were seeking to escape from it. They went to the moon, and then were there attacked, and they then went to Earth and established culture here on Earth approximately 6,000 years ago. And at that point in time, they were doing well, and they were mixing with the indigenous population of this earth. They were getting along with. And then about 4,000 years ago, the reptilians arrived here and again began to take over. And they instilled themselves in different places underground in the earth, and also this one part of them, the ruling part, took over and became involved in the politics and in the religion, and started controlling through these means at that point in time.
A woman named Sva Lee, who is widely regarded as trustworthy by many in the truth movement of all backgrounds, claims to be a former programmer for the Illuminati. She is currently in hiding, we hope, but her writings, which are still posted on the internet, fill in many of the details about how mind control slaves are programmed. One time she was asked about this reptilian idea. The question is, Sva Lee, I have to ask you this. There are stories floating around on the internet about the Illuminati and other agencies being run by extraterrestrials, in particular a reptilian race operating from a higher dimension. Any thoughts on that? My answer will probably cause a lot of anger, and it's not meant to step on any toes. Here it goes. I have never seen an alien or extraterrestrial. I have seen some programming to make people think they saw aliens as a cover story for programming, if they remembered. None of the head trainers I knew or others on the Leadership Council believed in aliens, although I never asked them. I personally believe that the reptilian stuff is actually the demonic at work. I have seen shape-shifting and other stuff because of demonic influence. Okay, so some of you here will say, gee, she believes in demons. That's as far out as aliens. Well, this is what the Illuminati certainly believe in. They know there are spiritual realities, and they think that they can control them. Those of a more cynical bent would say that the shape-shifting was a drug-induced hallucination and group hysteria in the context of a ritual setting. I will let each reader decide based on their personal comfort zone, but no, absolutely no reptiles or aliens seen in Washington, D.C. or San Diego, California as of 5 years ago. At least I never saw them. Interesting that Icke seems to validate this idea that spirits can make a person shapeshift.
It was a lady who channeled this consciousness back in 1990, and I'll just read what it said because it's so relevant to now with the hindsight of the years that have passed. And if anyone doesn't, believe in shapeshifting, they should have seen this woman's face when she was doing this, because she became someone else. Her face, it was like, whoa, changed to a completely different face.
I would say that Arizona Wilder's testimony is worth listening to. It seems to be consistent with high-level satanic rituals. I would suggest one possibility is that she may have been made to learn the reptilian story, as Spally suggested, so that if her programming did ever begin to break down, she would tell people that it was reptilians instead of satanic rituals. Something that a lot of people miss about her testimony is that the entire purpose for the ritual she did was to summon what she calls demons, or old ones, so that they could give more information about how the New World Order should be set up to the top-level people. It's clear that she believes it's the demons, not reptilians, that are behind the planning for the New World Order.
They materialize from out of another dimension and are present at rituals, and they are so powerful, and their presence is such an evilness about them, and they want out of this other dimension, and they can't. They have to be called out by someone who has that power, and the reptilians don't have this power. That's very important, that they don't have this power. So during a ritual, these old ones are called out, and they are what Christianity would have called the demons, and they want out. They're always demanding to be let out. And so you have to be very powerful to keep them in line and to make them go back when it is time for them to go back.
Why do the reptilians want to manifest these quote, demons at the rituals?
It brings power to the rituals. It brings power to them. They are told things by these entities, and they are encouraged to go on with what they're doing, and knowledge is imparted to them through these entities.
If this is the case, why is there no attempt to see what we can learn about them? Why all this focus on reptilians and Mars and Aryans? By her own admission, they aren't calling the shots. The spirits behind them are. I want to mention a few more things about the reptilian issue before moving on. She states that the reptilians change back to reptilians when asleep. Considering how many of them were educated in schools where they also lived amongst hundreds of others in dorms, and many of them are in the armed forces, you would think that someone would have noticed this happening by now. Hey buddy, you don't look so good when you fall asleep. She states that the royal reptilians can't stay in human form at the scent of blood and transform and go crazy, ripping into their victims. And in all those years, nobody has ever noticed this when they cut themselves, been around blood, menstruating women, etc. Considering they are so public, there is no way that they have never been in the vicinity of blood. The other testimony that Icke uses to confirm the reptilian issue is that of Credo Mutwa. This is what Ivan Fraser said about Mutwa. Quote, soon after this, the Arizona Wilder interview, David re-emerged from a trip to Africa, announcing a new video called The Reptilian Agenda, which is an interview with a Zulu shaman called Credo Mutwa, who is confirming the evidence of shape-shifting reptilians. Credo recounts various ancient Zulu myths about the reptilian race which manipulates mankind, which are taken literally by himself and Icke, and seen as a remarkable confirmation of the reptile-human race theory, although Credo's version is that the race actually originated on Earth, left it, and returned. Furthermore, the central reptile Aryan race thesis is fundamentally challenged by Mutwa's assertion that the black leaders of his country and their bloodlines are from the reptilian race also. Mutwa also speaks about personal encounters with gray aliens, which he states are servants of the reptilians. Mutwa elsewhere, rather contradictorily, states that the grays are actually the reptilians with an artificial skin. This contradiction is not challenged by Icke. I also agree with Fraser when he says that both Mutwa and Arizona Wilder may be consciously very genuine in recounting their experiences according to their memories, but I believe we need to be extremely careful before buying into what amounts to circumstantial stories with no proof. Also, I want to address this idea that's circulating on YouTube and other video sites, that people's pupils change and you can tell that they are reptilians this way. This is an effect caused by uploading a video with bad resolution. The same effect is happening with other elements in the picture, but you only notice it on the eyes because the eyes are very detailed things, and when the pixels cut out on them, it's more noticeable than it is with the other elements in the picture. Even Icke doesn't believe this stuff.
All over the internet, people started talking about this now, and these pictures are circulating. This might be probably is just a trick of the light, but it's very symbolic of what we're looking at.
In an out-of-body experience which occurred in 1971, he encountered 5 highly spiritually evolved, non-physical beings who informed him that he must write a revisionist history of the world. The purpose of the book was to take the readers out of their comfort zones by presenting them with truth regarding such diverse subjects like the true location of Atlantis, the duplicitous acts of the Illuminati, and the fundamentals of free energy technology. It was not until later that the author learned that the non-physical entities that he had encountered were associated with a provided consultation to a company involved in deep space research. There's no record of him doing anything like this on the internet, which seems odd since you would think that if a person who was publishing material on the internet so early in its history, that he would also leave some trail to his apparently earth-changing scientific research. Another interesting thing is that despite the fact that Icke, when referring to Desborough, calls him his American scientist friend, you can read Desborough's own bio to find out that his information was given to him by spiritual beings, like Icke. Desborough says, during the non-physical directorate, who were the overlords of a group of terrestrial mystics known through the centuries as the Quadragan. It is the role of the Quadragan to intercede in the political affairs of the world periodically in an attempt to elevate the level of human spirituality. It's interesting that, like David, Desborough also speaks out very harshly against Alice Bailey and the Ascended Masters in his book. He even says the Lucius Trust is a major New Age command center on behalf of the Illuminati, and her book, Education in the New Age, outlined a social engineering program which later was adopted by the Club of Rome. In it she wrote, "The science of eugenics will grow." Desborough also writes, Ascended Masters were in actuality merely nicknames she had assigned to the wealthy Masonic patrons of the Theosophical Society, and displayed outrage against phony psychics claiming to channel these non-existent beings. But in an equally amazing feat of doublethink, Desborough believes the exact thing that Alice Bailey believes, that is, that the non-physical director, the single most influential person in the development of Icke's current ideas, is a man named Brian Desborough. Desborough wrote a lot of conspiracy articles and posted them on the internet in the mid-90s into the 2000s. Later, these articles would be compiled into a book. Desborough is behind an astonishing amount of Icke's research. There's a lot of interesting things about Mr. Desborough. First of all, despite the fact that his bio says that he served as a director of research and development for several American high technology companies and has